Hello, everyone. My name is Amy Harder. I'm executive editor of Cypher News, and welcome to this session on AI and climate change. Clearly a popular topic considering the standing room only in this crowd. We're going to get started, but in one moment, we have an audience participation opportunity now. Raise your hand if you've ever used ChatGPT or another type of AI service. Okay, how about in the last 12 hours? Okay, and the last 12 minutes? Okay, no hands, but I'm sure some of you are using it right now and not even listening. Suffice to say, this is the rare topic that has permeated pretty much everybody's lives on this planet, seemingly overnight. So of course, there would be cross-cutting energy and climate implications that we must address. We heard from Bill earlier today that he predicts AI will be a very significant accelerant to climate technologies. So we're going to unpack all of that and more. To help us do that, we have an incredible lineup of speakers. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Priya Donti. She wears two important hats. In 2019, she co-founded the Climate Change AI, a global nonprofit initiative focused on the intersection of climate change and machine learning. That was in 2019, so long before any of us were asking ChatGPT day trips out of London. She's also an assistant professor at MIT, working in two different departments, electrical engineering and computer science, along with a laboratory for information and decision systems. So Priya, please welcome Priya to the stage.
Thanks, Amy. So recently, right, when people think of AI, they do tend to think of GPT. But in reality, AI refers to a wide variety of computational techniques spanning things like physics-informed machine learning, interpretable machine learning, reinforcement learning, and so forth. And that plays out in various ways, both in theory and in practice, to help us reduce greenhouse gas emissions and adapt to the effects of a changing climate. For instance, organizations like Climate Trace are using AI to distill satellite imagery into actionable information about where greenhouse gas emissions are occurring in order to provide input to international climate negotiations. And there's similar applications of satellite imagery for pinpointing deforestation, assessing crop types on land, and so forth. In addition, organizations like Open Climate Fix have halved the error of the electricity supply and demand forecasts on the UK grid in order to help us actually better manage the intermittency that comes with renewables. And this idea of forecasting is pervasive across climate change related areas. And in addition to actually providing insight and information, AI is also used to actually automatically optimize and control various physical systems in order to help improve their efficiency or their efficacy. So for example, it's already being used to do various kinds of power grid optimization to, again, enable us to integrate renewables, as well as, I think, familiarly to many of us, optimize the heating and cooling systems in various buildings. There are also some applications that are maybe a little less sexy, things like predictive maintenance, trying to actually identify when there are faults on switches on the German rail infrastructure, or identify when there are leaks in our natural gas infrastructure. As well as things like accelerating the process of scientific experimentation with companies like AIonics, mentioning that they are kind of boosting the efficacy of discovering new batteries by 10x by analyzing the outcomes of past experiments and learning what to do next. And AI is also pervasive across science and engineering workflows of pertinence to climate. So things like helping us to approximate or come up with faster versions of our climate models or energy models or city planning models in order to help us enable better optimization and planning of these systems. So I think there's a huge amount of opportunity for AI to play a role, and I guess Bill agrees, which is great. And for those who are interested in kind of learning more about the expanse of the area, I'd encourage you to check out this paper, Tackling Climate Change with Machine Learning. Now, of course, though, when we're talking about, as we are in the summit, right, making aggressive progress on climate-related goals, we have to acknowledge that AI, in addition to being an accelerant for climate progress, also can be a detractor. So for instance, AI is being used to accelerate oil and gas exploration and extraction. It's a major driver of increased consumption through targeted advertising, of It's changing how we consume information about climate online. And it's also having implications for the transformation of our transportation sector. Autonomous vehicles, for example, can be a force towards decarbonizing our transportation sector, but they can also be a force towards entrenching our existing modes of transit in a way that's not helpful to that. And AI itself has a computational and hardware footprint through the electricity consumed by computations, the water, as well as the materiality of the underlying hardware. And we need to make sure that we're aligning that with our climate change related goals overall. So what do we do about this? Well, the kind of alignment of AI with climate action is not going to come top down from a small set of people. Instead, we need to view AI as something that, across society, across many sectors and global contexts, we need to increase fundamental literacy and capacity to allow people to solve problems bottom up, leveraging these tools where appropriate. In addition, we need to make sure that people are able to coordinate more effectively with each other in order to kind of leverage the kind of cross-functional and multidisciplinary skill sets that come from the different sectors and disciplines we need to merge together for this challenge. And that can come in a lot of different forms, right? Large-scale education and capacity building, more targeted connection building, providing research to deployment infrastructure like filling gaps in critical data sets or providing simulation environments, as well as providing expertise and thought leadership on things like how to best deploy funding or how to best form policies in order to actually mobilize the ecosystem together. So this is some of the work that we're doing at Climate Change AI, for instance, providing large-scale summer schools that are educating kind of thousands of people around the world. For those who are interested in this area on AI and climate change, I'd actually encourage you to check out the summer school that's ongoing right now. In addition to providing venues for people to share research, providing funding, building community, and providing thought leadership on some of these things like critical data gaps, funding deployments, policy, and so forth. So we're definitely looking for partners in this work, and whether through us or in general, I hope that all of us can be kind of enablers of the transition towards making sure AI is actually working for us and not against us in enabling a rapid and equitable climate transition. Thanks.
Thank you, Priya, for that rapid-fire introduction of AI. I think we could all afford to go to that summer school and learn a thing or two. I want to introduce our next keynote speaker, Melanie Nakagawa, Chief Sustainability Officer of Microsoft. All of us in this room know that Microsoft has been a leader on energy and climate technologies for a long time. And just in the last couple of years, they have also become to be at the forefront of the AI race. Melanie brings a wealth of energy and climate experience, most recently advising President Biden in Washington, D.C. So please give a warm welcome to Melanie.
Thank you, Amy. Now the question is, can I do the round without falling on my face and getting too dizzy? So thank you so much for that introduction. So let me just start with just level setting where we're at. So one of the things that we're really excited about is Horizons. Horizons have this incredible opportunity for us to take a look at what is not even imaginable, be able to scale this at the speed we need for the future state of what we want to be at. And Horizons is a place for us to dream the unimaginable. Why am I talking about Horizons? Well, because at Microsoft, Horizons are a great way for us to frame how we think about climate investment and climate impact as we scale emerging technologies and technological solutions around the world. Let me explain how. So we think about it across 3 horizons, and I'll talk you through this today. So first, Horizon 1. Horizon 1 is the infrastructure we need to build today to enable us to meet these objectives around AI and think about the opportunities for AI to accelerate sustainability. This is the things like infrastructure, the skills, the model capabilities. Horizon 2 is building on the existing technologies we have today. How do we use AI to accelerate those solutions? How do we use AI to optimize energy systems? Many of the things that Priya talked about, that's Horizon 2. And then Horizon 3, which I think is where many of the people in this room have lived, have journeyed, and are building businesses around. Horizon 3 is that area just beyond that distance of where creativity and imagination plays the most important role. It's what's going to take courage to get there, but it's also where you can see really scalable solutions that are needed today. So I'll talk through each of those, but the key idea here for today's talk is really about how AI holds this tremendous promise for the energy transition. It can actually help us turn the unimaginable into possibility. It allows us to turn those ideas into reality, and we'll talk a little bit more about those examples today. Now, one of the things that Priya touched on is, well, Melanie, how are you thinking about this when isn't AI itself energy intensive? And that is a fair question to be asking. And that is why Microsoft remains committed and steadfast to our commitments to be carbon negative, water positive, a zero waste company, and to protect ecosystems all by 2030. Let me just step through that a little bit. One thing that not everyone in the room may know is that 96% of Microsoft's emissions actually come from our value chain and our supply chain. But our commitment to be carbon negative has 3 stages. The first is to reduce our scope 1 and 2, the direct emissions that we use, which is net for us, 4% in our latest report, keep that to near zero. And last year, we reported that we actually are seeing a 6% decline, so we're directionally heading the right way, taking big bets on clean energy, most recently announcing 34 gigawatts of renewable power under a PPA to date. So we're scaling that quickly. The second part to be carbon negative is to hold our scope 3 to reduce that by more than half. That's our value chain emissions. And the last part is to remove the remainder. So that's a key part to how we're trying to make sure that the resource intensity is one that we can grow sustainably, as well as the other work we're doing around model efficiency and other things. But also one thing that is not often talked about, which is why I think today we're all here, is to talk about the incredible work that AI is already playing today in the energy transition, and I'll walk you through some examples. But before I get there, I should introduce myself. I'm Melanie Nakagawa, the Chief Sustainability Officer at Microsoft, and one of the key things that I've spent my career on is focused at that intersection of policy, technology, and finance, how all of these come together to scale the growth on climate impact. And now, as Microsoft CSO, there's a twofold mission. One is, of course, to meet our operational commitments and to focus on Microsoft's own sustainability footprint and our work towards that. But the second is also to share our learnings and our journey with others along the way, talking to other sustainability officers, talking to other companies that work with the Microsoft ecosystem, but really to help partner and scale everyone else's journey on sustainability. And we're going to share some of those learnings with all of you. So we're starting with Horizon 1. So Horizon 1, as I talked about, is the infrastructure we need today to meet these aspirational goals, the potential, but also what's currently happening when it comes to AI. And when we think about technology at Microsoft, AI is no exception to how we want to scale this business. Last year was a very exciting step forward with the advance of generative AI that so many in the room are familiar with, and I think the number of hands that were raised is a record setter here that I think would say, 98%, Amy, were raising their hands? So you know what it can do. But let me walk you through some of the things it's doing today with some examples, because we really witnessed the power that AI has to accelerate sustainability, deploy solutions. It's not just huge potential, but it's actually capabilities that we're seeing across all 3 horizons. Moving on to Horizon, so let me finish up Horizon 1. So Horizon 1 is really about this physical infrastructure piece. I'll talk about a couple areas where we're trying to see advancements here. So the first is how we design for sustainability in that infrastructure and how we're using AI as well to see those new frontiers. One is in low carbon building materials. As I mentioned to all of you, 96% of Microsoft's emissions are actually coming from our value chain. That's things like the chips we put into our data centers and our devices. It's the embodied carbon when we physically build data centers, from the steel and the concrete that goes into it to the fuels that we use to move our products around. The good news here is that innovation's rapidly emerging. You could see it all around downstairs and upstairs, even around the summit today. But the challenge we see is that these are also nascent markets that need more investment to scale up quickly to meet the challenge ahead. This is exactly why Microsoft has created the Climate Innovation Fund. We launched it in 2020. It's a $1 billion vehicle that is deploying capital into projects that are going to meet our operational commitments or scaling investments in innovative solutions at scale to commercial levels, so that not only Microsoft can benefit, but so much of our supply chain and our value chain can benefit from it. Why are we focused on this? So 13.5% of global carbon emissions comes from the steel and concrete sector in construction. And much of that construction growth in our own data center growth is coming from that steel and concrete, and we want to find ways to reduce the embodied carbon in that. A great example of that is a recent announcement we made last year, an investment in a company called H2 Green Steel. This company produces a green steel that can showcase up to 80 to 95% reduction in steel as a green steel business. This is the kind of scale we need to see. But it also extends to concrete as well. And so the 50% is our latest commitment that we want to see over a 50% reduction in the embodied carbon of concrete in our business to help us scale to reduce those Scope 3 emissions. And then the third key piece is once you build these data centers, we also must be committed to ensuring that those data centers are powered by carbon-free sources of power. So most recently, we announced a partnership with Brookfield Asset Management and Brookfield Renewables to deploy 10.5 gigawatts across the US and Europe between now and 2030. That's gonna not only bring more carbon-free sources of power to where we have data centers and where we operate, but frankly to the supply chains that are there as well. That kind of scale in corporate purchasing, but the scale in clean energy needs to match the scale we're seeing in the ambition around AI. So now going on to Horizon 2. This is the horizon where it's about using AI in existing solutions. It's not about creating net new or new areas, but rather how are you deploying it today to make systems more, to optimize systems, to make them more efficient, and to help create more sustainability outcomes in this space. This is about accelerating solutions in what I think was mentioned earlier, like grids. Now, I think you mentioned that not being that most attractive or sexy, I think is the way you called it, but this is very sexy stuff, especially for a Breakthrough Energy Summit. So I'll give you two examples of what we're seeing in Horizon 2, where AI is actually being used today to help improve grid optimization, get more clean energy on the grids. These are the kind of stories and solutions we want to see at scale. These are the kinds of investments, frankly, that Microsoft is backing through the Climate Innovation Fund. So the first on grid enhancing technologies, let me talk about dynamic line rating and a company called Line Vision. This company is using AI to expand the capacity of existing transmission lines. They collect real-time parameter data such as temperature, wind speed, line sag, and they combine that with AI algorithms to get more output out of those lines. In a recent, case study that they did with National Grid UK, they showed a 60% increase in transmission capacity, bringing on roughly 600 megawatts of more offshore wind onto the existing transmission line. Now, of course, we need more transmission as well, but it's really important to talk about the solutions and digitally enabled solutions that are available today to scale this market to get that clean power we need at scale. The second example in this area I want to highlight is grid optimization for automation and efficiency. The company here is Utilidata, another Climate Innovation Fund investment company. They use AI-powered technology to capture high-quality data at the meter level so that utilities can make smarter and better informed decisions. What are the impacts of a technology like this? It enhances resiliency, it reduces energy losses, provides for better renewable energy integration, improves grid stability, and reduces the reliance on non-renewable fuels. Now, the impact has been so far that they've shown that the utilities using their voltage control technologies have reported an energy savings of up to 5%. So effectively, you can think about this Horizon 2 as extension of the tools that are already available, but how do you apply AI to those to unlock the new opportunities and new capabilities to reach scale? Now, moving on to Horizon 3, where, again, I think if by a show of hands, I'm sure many of you are here in Horizon 3 and charging ahead at it, but it really requires creativity, exploration, innovation. It also requires investment. AI is already having a material impact on things like battery discovery and new materials. So let me just pull that example out a little bit further. Earlier this year, Microsoft partnered with the Pacific Northwest National Laboratories, PNNL, looking at 32 million material candidates for battery technology. We narrowed it down to 500,000 candidates, and then in a second level analysis, narrowed it down to 18 in the course of 80 hours. This is the kind of rapid scientific innovation that's possible now today with AI that's gonna hopefully unlock incredible breakthroughs. This new battery has actually then been created, and we expect that to be using roughly 70% less lithium than a lithium-ion battery. So these are areas that have already been deployed and that we're looking at, and looking at more encouragement into the space of, again, how do you use AI in these spaces? Now, a key part here that I think was touched on too earlier is what is our responsibility across all of these horizons? First is gonna be partnership. We know that we alone cannot unlock all the power that is possible with new technologies and new emerging solutions. We need partners in this room, partners elsewhere, to really help us work together to co-innovate and seek out how do we unlock the power of AI solutions today to accelerate the business, accelerate the energy transition. We also know we must use it responsibly and sustainably. And we are working hard to address the energy intensity and the resource intensity of AI from design to construction to operations. The examples I highlighted earlier are some examples of what we're trying to do on green steel, concrete, more clean power to our supply chain, as well as to our data centers. What we've shared so far is we've done two things where I think when you're kind of walking out of here to learn a little bit more about our journey so far. So as I mentioned, those are our commitments: carbon negative, water positive, zero waste, all by 2030, and by 2050 to remove all of the carbon since our founding in 1975 from electricity using carbon removal. We announced most recently in our sustainability report that we're on track in some ways. As I mentioned, our direct emissions, scope 1 and 2, are showing a decrease thanks to all the work we're doing to scale renewables directly to our operations, but there's more work to be done. We also announced in our report 5 million tons of contracted CDR in our last year's report and continue to scale that marketplace. We've met over 1.5 million people with access to safe drinking water and working hard on water reduction as well as water replenishment. Now, but the key part is, where else can we be focusing? What more can we be doing? And so for that reason, we also published the Accelerating Sustainability with AI Playbook. It creates, for those who haven't yet even started on their journey, a 5-point plan of how they can be applying AI to accelerate sustainability, not only in their own work, but with their partners and others around the world. And I do encourage all of those here to take a look at both of these. Now, looking ahead, meaningful action is going to take all of us, as I mentioned. It's a collective action effort. It requires all of us in the room and, frankly, beyond our four walls. It also is what gives me optimism, because I know that we're not alone in this effort. There's so many gathered here today. The numbers are soaring in terms of who's committed to this effort, who's joining in the ranks to not only use technology and emerging technologies to accelerate your own progress, but whether it was Eric's conversation this morning about GDP growth and progress and profitability and sort of country-level growth, but also for humanity. And I think that this collective action from all of us is so critical and so key to this. So many of you, you've looked at many of horizons, you've probably climbed to the new heights, you've seen the vistas from this vantage point, and I'm really looking to learn from all of you. So to close, let me just leave you 3 questions to think about as you have coffee and as you go into the rest of the day today. The first is, what are you creating today that can be accelerated with AI? The second one is, what are you already doing that AI can enhance, such as that Horizon 2 conversation we just had? And the third is, what does your 2030 sustainability horizon look like? I think these are 3 key questions that are going to help ground us in where we can start to apply these emerging technology solutions to help reach that scale that we are all talking about and that is sorely needed to tackle the climate challenge head on. I cannot wait to see what all of us here in the room get to unlock and what this event looks like a year from now, and how so many of these businesses have reached a new type of scale, and the role that corporations like Microsoft can play in accelerating that journey. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Melanie, for that conversation. I know we'll dive into a lot of what you talked about in our panel discussion in a little while. I do want to introduce a solution spotlight. Melanie touched on this few examples already, and we're going to hear even more about that. I'll be inviting to the stage Jared Deutsch, President of Resource Modeling Solutions at Geologic AI. That's a startup that aims to use AI to help more efficiently extract critical minerals from underground, which all of us know the critical roles that those minerals play in our energy transition. Jared describes himself as a geometallurgist, so I'm willing to bet he might be the only one in this room who can claim that title. So with that, Jared, please come to the stage.
Thank you so much. At Geologic AI, our mission is to accelerate and optimize mining decisions to meet the growing need for critical minerals. Critical minerals provide the means to decarbonize, to build hospitals or anything, and to ensure a secure food supply. But these come with significant societal and environmental implications. These environmental impacts are staggering. The 2023 Breakthrough Energy Report highlighted steel's contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. Steel is responsible for roughly 3.5 gigatons of CO2, which is about 8% of global emissions. We believe AI can be a catalyst towards a reduction in these emissions. And to that end, today I want to highlight one of our clients has published a study where they took our AI technology and demonstrated a 5.3% reduction in CO2 at one of the world's largest iron ore mines. That's pretty awesome. But how can AI help us with this? That is the question, right? Let's start with one of the hardest challenges in mining. One of the hardest challenges in mining is we need to make decisions about the extraction, the processing, and the responsible management of billions of tons of rock with very limited data. How limited? Well, we sample about a billionth of the deposit before we make these decisions. A sample of a billionth is like a US presidential opinion poll where I ask one person every 2 years who they're going to vote for. That's not great. So, but what does this mean for greenhouse gas emissions? It's great, we have limited data. But what this means for greenhouse gas emissions is we need to keep these processes in the perfect operating window to minimize emissions. Whether we're cooking iron ore at 1,300 degrees Celsius to make steel, or we're using bacteria to extract copper and dissolve the sulfides, these processes work best in a very narrow window and we need to keep them in that window to reduce emissions. So back to our poll, the clear starting point would be to ask that one person a ton of questions. Similarly, for mining, at Geologic AI, we're going to ask a huge number of questions of the rock samples that we take. We do this by using a fleet of sensors to scan the rocks with every scrap of technology we can find to get as much information on the composition, the mineralogy, the texture. Why? Because all of these things impact the emissions. And if we have a deep understanding of those things, we know how that's going to impact any form of downstream processing you do. Of course, we still have the big problem where we have this deep information on very limited samples. So we need to make predictions of the vast, unsampled portions of the deposit. This is where AI comes in to lend a tremendous hand to us. AI excels at combining all of the dense information we collect and putting that information together to make smarter, better, more accurate models of the deposit. A more accurate model of the mineral deposit means we can make better mining decisions. Back to better mining decisions. That 5.3% CO2 reduction that was shown at an iron ore mine, they showed that by combining their deep geologic understanding with our AI technology, they could get a much more accurate model of the deposit. So Tricia Scott at Anglo American and her team dug into one of the world's largest iron ore mines, made a much more predictive model, and found that, hey, we can change our mine plan, and just by doing that, no capital, we can reduce our CO2 emissions by 5.3%. That's amazing. This is just one of the examples I could talk about. There's others, optimizing energy-intensive grinding, ranking critical mineral prospects, all of these fun examples that we could talk about. But really, AI gives us the tools for more reliable, faster, and deeper insights into mineral deposits. And that is essential for the discovery and development of them. I want to thank Breakthrough Energy, and in particular, Chris Revest, for their continued support of us. Thank you all for listening, and I look forward to more conversations.
Well, thank you, Jared, for that conversation. I would like to now introduce somebody who we heard got a couple shout outs in the earlier conversation with Bill and Rody. Vinod Khosla, a founder of Khosla Ventures. He needs little introduction for this crowd in particular, but something that might be a little less well known is that he is the very first venture investor into OpenAI, all the way back in 2018, when once again, it was not on the minds of any of us, the whole topic of AI. So without further ado, Vinod, please join me on stage.
Thanks.
Well, thank you, Vinod, for being with us here today. So yes, you made that 2018 investment into OpenAI, But you also made another investment in 2018 into Commonwealth Fusion. Can you reflect upon these two investments and the differing trajectories that these two companies are taking and what it says about the potential interaction between these two industries?
Well, OpenAI, of course, will create AI that consumes lots and lots of power. So AI will make the climate problem much worse unless somebody like Commonwealth Fusion can solve it. My general view is climate needs hard science solutions. I've looked at a lot of work in AI and climate change, and I'm generally on the skeptical side. There's a few exceptions, most of which we haven't started to work on.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on...
Sorry for the downer.
But I think we all need to hear that. We want to have real conversations here. So why don't you, can you elaborate a little bit more about that skepticism and where it comes from?
Well, I've looked at almost all the papers published at NeuroIPS, which is an AI conference on climate change and places like that. I would say most of them are minor changes. You know, a 5% improvement there, a 10% improvement here. The hard problems are the ones that have been mentioned repeatedly. Steel, that's not an AI solution. Cement, aviation, sustainable aviation fuel. These are not AI problems, and they're 90% of the problem. Lots of people do lots of things, and they're good marginal improvements. My favorite one is when Sheryl Crow said you should use 1 sheet of toilet paper, not 2. I'm sorry, that isn't going to solve climate change. So I focus on the really hard things like fusion, like super hard geothermal, for dispatchable power generation, things like public transit. Now, the electric conversion is mostly done or on its way to being done. It'll take another 10, 15 years before we are mostly electric in cars. But shipping hasn't been solved. That's not an AI problem. So the really, really hard problems are science problems. Now, the good news is sometime, I suspect, and this will surprise a lot of people in the room, we will have an AI scientist. And then we will have real solutions to climate, because that scientist is what we need to solve hard problems.
How soon do you think that could be?
I tend to be optimistic, but sooner than most people think, like a year or two.
Wow. Well, I think the next summit in 2026, maybe we can have the scientists here on stage.
Let me mention, we just talked about mineral discovery. AI has been used in that area, but only marginally. We haven't started to develop the kinds of sensors we need to look a kilometer under the ground that can then be applied in multimodal ways to AI. So most of the applications are toy applications, marginal applications, a lot of traditional statistics being relabeled AI, and nothing wrong with it because they all help. So I don't want to be skeptical, but I don't want to get overly optimistic. Eventually, AI will do better materials discovery, better alloys, but we are not even close to solving some of those problems.
So Bill said earlier today that he predicts AI will significantly accelerate climate technologies, and he said that we would all be surprised by the upside of that. Do you disagree with Bill?
So Bill and I are probably equally optimistic about the pace at which AI is developing. We've discussed it multiple times. So there we agree, and if we do get our AI scientists or get some other capabilities that don't exist in AI today, like reasoning and logic and the ability to do much more sophisticated math, then once we have those breakthroughs, we will make rapid progress. So I agree with him, but contingent on some breakthroughs we don't have today.
Well, you've already talked about one, which is fusion, and Commonwealth fusion specifically. So let's kind of dig into that a little bit. I read a story the other day, I think it was in the Washington Post, about the potential and the likelihood that natural gas and coal, in some instances, are actually either remaining online or coming online to satisfy the power demand for AI. Are you concerned that we could see an increase in greenhouse gas emissions and electricity because of this? And how fast can a company like CFS scale up to meet this demand?
So I have a radical view of coal and natural gas. We shouldn't shut those plants down. We should make a plan to convert them to fusion boilers, for example. These power plants can be upgraded to be zero carbon. If you do fusion boilers, you may need to change the turbine too, but you don't need to go through this 10-year process of permitting new plants. At that level, could we do all 5,000 major power plants in this country? Probably, but in the next 25 years. Yeah, that's the optimistic view. And frankly, if you have to build them from scratch, it'll take a lot longer than if we repower them very differently. And so that, whenever possible, that's the goal. In cement, we are trying to say, let's not shut down the current cement plants, just turn them into better technologies. Same thing with coal and natural gas. More pragmatic, you get less resistance from the incumbents. They don't fight back as hard, and they have powerful lobbies in Washington, so at least in the US.
Is that something you've specifically looked into for CFS?
That is definitely something CFS has looked into, but Bob is here. He can speak to it. I don't know if he's in this room or not.
Well, raise your hand, Bob, if you're here, and we can bring you into the conversation. Very quickly, before I want to get sort of a lightning round lay of the land from you, Vinod, since we have you on stage. But before we get to that, I understand that you are actually working using AI to accelerate innovation at CFS specifically. Can you share that with the group?
Well, so plasma control is something DeepMind has demonstrated and written some papers on, and that'd be a good contributor. But I don't think it's the essential component of innovation. Obviously, building high Tesla magnets was the first step, and then all the other phases. So it will help in plasma control, and in fact, Commonwealth Fusion has been working on that, but it's not the critical. Again, I say, what is the critical enabling technology that makes something happen for all the things we need to make happen? I have this view, there's only probably a dozen technologies we need to radically innovate in to cut most of the emissions. They account for 80 or 90% of all emissions, and we should go after those technologies, mostly hard physics and chemistry problems. But I do think we're making progress on all those.
So before we dive into AI even more deeply with our panel, I understand we were chatting last night at the reception, Vinod, and you had some interesting, counterintuitive thoughts on cement and geothermal that I think might be interesting for this crowd to share. Because I know those are two areas you've looked into a lot.
So cement isn't an AI problem. Every plant emits carbon dioxide. What we are doing is capturing the carbon dioxide and putting it back into product. So it's useful product. It's the one product that doesn't ask a cement plant to shut down. It increases the output of the plant with the same input, same amount of limestone coming into the plant, and reduces the cost per ton. If we don't get to this lower cost than fossil alternatives kind of approach to steel, cement, power generation, they will scale very slowly. If we do get to those breakthroughs, then we will have very fast breakthrough. Geothermal is the same way. Lots of marginal efforts that improve efficiency of current geothermal, but current geothermal, at least in the US, is 0.4% of production. You increase it 50%, you might get to 0.6%. Completely irrelevant. Useful, economic, you can make money at it, but not at the scale of replacing power. Now, if you do hot rock geothermal, like above 450 degrees, you can probably compete with natural gas for a new plant being built. And there's one key technology. Can you drill at those temperatures, especially at depth, and suddenly geothermal can become 20, 30, 40% of US production and apply globally. So technologies that scale economically are the only ones that will actually accelerate our solutions.
In our final moment together before we pull up the panel, I do want to end with a quick lightning round question, Vinod. And I think I saw your hand go up when I asked if you used ChatGPT or another AI service. What was the last thing that you asked ChatGPT about?
I had it plan my garden. You know, look, you want a garden to flower in early spring, early summer, late summer. You look at the zones you're in, the height of the plants, their water needs. I actually had it lay out a whole table of what to plant together. It would have taken me a day to do that. I love gardening.
And how are your plants doing? Are they alive and well?
Beautiful.
Okay. Don't want to get that wrong. Well, Vinod, thank you very much for the conversation, and I look forward to your participation on the panel.
Thank you.
Well, that was a great conversation, and now we're going to play a little bit of musical chairs and invite our panel back up to the stage. So Priya, will you please join me on stage again, and then Vinod as well. And we will have two additional panelists join us as well in a little circle so you can all see us. Well, you know two of my panelists already, and then to my immediate left, we have Russell Tham, Managing Director of Emerging Technologies at Temasek, Singapore's state-owned investment company. And to my right, we have David Sandalow, the inaugural fellow at Columbia University's Center on Global Energy Policy and co-director of the Energy and Environment Concentration at the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia. In these capacities, he has recently written some white papers on AI and also climate policy in China. So with that, David, I want you to lay out some of the top findings from the paper that you released, I think, in December 2023, which I think will lend well to Russell, you talking about your focus at Temasek. I also want to say that I want us to dive into some of the things that Vinod said. Maybe you disagree with him, and I think that's okay, and I suspect you would be okay with that as well.
Happy to be challenged.
And I think this circular setup really lends itself well to that, so we can look each other in the eye when we disagree. So David, I will hand it over to you.
All right, I will challenge the great Vinod Khosla, which I do with great trepidation because Vinod is a friend of many years and has also been right about a lot of things for a long time. But two main messages in our report. First, there are lots of things AI can do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And I think it's useful to group those into two buckets. The first bucket is incremental but important changes. We've already heard about some of those, for example, dynamic line rating that Melanie spoke about, which she pointed out 60% improvement over existing lines. There's also incremental but important changes in solar and wind farms from predicting solar and wind patterns. And I guess, Vinod, what I would say to you is if you start to add up enough incremental changes at 5 or 10%, you start to have a real impact. I mean, if 5% of greenhouse gas emissions globally is 2.5 billion gigatons, that starts to get pretty important. But then beyond the incremental but important changes, I think there's transformational changes as well. I think methane emission regulation is one area that is really key here. So right now we are able to regulate methane in Europe, in the United States, and with the Global Methane Pledge as a result of scientific work that depends utterly upon machine learning. We have satellite tools, we have drones and others that are collecting methane data, which we could not process without machine learning tools. And that's giving us the ability to control this greenhouse gas in really important ways. And then another transformational change is in materials innovation. And you know, when Thomas Edison invented the modern light bulb, was spoken about this morning, 150 years ago, he took several months to try dozens of different carbon filaments, and there's the famous thing that invention is, 90% perspiration and 10% inspiration. Well, using AI tools today, we can simulate 1 million of those interactions in a second, basically. And that allows us to down-select more quickly from materials, much more quicker than Edison did, but also to test materials that don't now exist and see whether if they were fabricated, they could make a difference. So I think that has enormous implications in batteries, as Melanie already spoke about I think Microsoft PNNL work in this area that's really important, but super strong lightweight steel, biofuels, all kinds of areas I think can be assisted with that. So I'm more bullish.
That's great. Well, we might give Vinod's response on that in a minute, but Russell, I want to turn to you and hear about how are you thinking about AI from an investment perspective, particularly when it comes to material discovery, which we heard from Jared about more.
Yeah, first, thank you for inviting me. A couple of thoughts first. Just a quick introduction to Temasek if you don't know. It's nicely teed up by Eric. We didn't plan this because his key statement there is energy is prosperity. I'm sure many of you heard his statement. Temasek's purpose statement is so every generation prospers. So that's that similarity there. And obviously, when we thought about the purpose statement, it was we take into account a wider set of stakeholders. The fact that we said so every generation prospers also reflects our generational mindset. So we think very, very long term. Now, just a bit more on a couple of stuff we're doing at Temasek, then I'll come back to a bit of my views on material science. In fact, my views are quite close to David, so I'll shorten it somewhat. Temasek has been a very active investor in this energy transition, this climate tech. So I think almost every single company you referred to, directly or indirectly, Temasek have invested in. We're also investors in Khosla, Breakthrough Energy, Brookfield Energy Transition Fund, a whole range. We're also very active in various global forums to set standards, to shape transition financing, concessionary financing. So we do all that. And we started to deploy a lot of capital around the AI hardware architectures, which we think could be vastly more energy efficient. In fact, I think historians will actually relabel this somewhat. Maybe this is not the fourth industrial revolution, but maybe I will call it the second cognitive revolution. And why do I say that? Actually, there's a first cognitive revolution. And that was a long time ago. It took over many, many, many generations when we kind of mastered fire to cook. So it nourished our brain over time. But this is the first time I think the technology has showed up. If it lives up to its full potential, augments our cognitive capacity vastly. Now, it could reach the point next year where you get an AI scientist. So that's rather aggressive. Coming back to materials, if I look through all our climate tech investment, there's one core thematics. A lot of them is predicated on material science innovation. Some are quantum leaps, some are incremental. The whole range is there. You can think about it, higher efficiency perovskites, new cathode materials, new enzymes that are vastly more energy efficient, so to speak, or can enable low carbon or carbon neutral processes. So these are all, I think, very fundamental. And now, coming to AI, if you're a material science, you leverage some density function theory, some computational chemistry, but fundamentally still a lot of intuition, I think. And it's quite iterative when you do your work. Now, with the advent of this version of AI, generative AI, diffusion models, and the whole 9 yards, obviously the envelope shifts. Now, you can actually get three things out of it as the technology progresses rapidly, right? You're going to get new materials, I think. Your development cycle times are going to compress rapidly for the reasons some of you have said. Third, you can actually create synthesis process that are a lot more energy efficient. Right? I think there are many, many examples by which we can elaborate. But are we really there yet? I think if you think data is fundamentally necessary, today what I've seen published, the data sets are still sparse in AI world or incomplete. So then I think there's some remaining work to be done there. But I fundamentally believe material science will see a golden era in the coming years, depending how fast this version of generative AI technologies evolve. So that's my spew.
That's great. I want to hand it to Priya to reflect upon both what Bill said earlier today about AI being a very significant accelerant for AI, and also responding to what Vinod said, and just to get your take on both of those.
Yeah, absolutely. I think actually a really important point here is that AI is a tool alongside, right, engineering, science, policy, and so forth. It is only the hero in a couple of circumstances. So I think what I interpret Vinod as saying is AI is not the hero in general. That doesn't mean it's not useful.
Are we still the heroes, the humans?
Or, the innovation, the humans, so forth. And so why talk about AI in that context? One, like engineering, like policy, right, like science, we need to have, in some sense, the correct amount of capability societally to bring these tools together in order to make progress. And given the fact that this is an emerging area, then questions of capacity building, of innovation to get there become really important. It would be a real loss for society if everybody in every field decided to work on AI instead. But it would be a real gain if everybody across all fields became literate in AI to understand where it actually plays a role. I think the second big reason to talk about this is that the type of AI that I think will actually be the right type of AI to assist in different settings is not actually the same. AI is not a monolithic set of technologies, and in some sense, the types of technologies that actually help us to optimize power grids safely in order to integrate renewables are not merely, let's say, like scale-ups of GPT. The fundamental internal properties and guarantees on them are necessary. So when we talk about AI in a climate context, I think we also have to think about, given the really short timescales, how do we not just hope that AI innovation will trickle down in a way that benefits us, but instead, how can we actually develop AI in directions that directly work for us and are from the ground up cognizant of what the needs of climate-related areas are?
I want to dive in a bit deeper to something you said, Vinod, in our chat about, and sort of linking in a couple of things. The physical nature of the energy system is so much more than, say, the software evolution that Bill spoke about earlier. Will we reach a point where do you think we'll reach a point where AI will be so sophisticated that we won't actually need to do physical tests, and we could, in fact, just do everything, say, testing the reliability of a grid? Do you think we'll need to do physical tests if AI can have enough data to do it sufficiently without that?
Is that to me or to?
Yeah, you were nodding your head, so maybe we'll
Sure.
go first to you.
So I think that there are actually two pillars here. One, if we try to just learn things from raw data in places where we already have information, that's both wasteful and less well-performing than places where you can do things like embed information about how power grids actually work into your AI-related workflows or into the way that the AI algorithm actually works. So if you do that, you can potentially get some, common sense idea of how well the system is likely to work, your AI system is likely to work on your physical system. That said, our scientific and physical models are also imperfect. So we can't even today throw scientific and physical models directly onto a power grid and do nothing to monitor them. We know we're making assumptions. We know there are some discrepancies, and that those discrepancies can lead to blackouts. And so this is where I think also real testing becomes really critical to iron out what our data isn't telling us, what our kind of existing physics isn't telling us, and actually see how these things bear out in practice.
Vinod, do you think we could ever get rid of physical tests?
Well, I think the next 10 years, we will be in this domain of human interaction and oversight of AI. It doesn't matter whether it's an AI doctor, AI teacher, material science discovery. But over time, I think we will get high confidence in this, and that's what I say, creating AI scientists. Maybe the first generation is AI scientist interns, and there's companies developing AI software programmer interns today. But we'll have sort of level of capability that's basic, increasing over time. And then we will have more confidence, very little doubt, a decade from now, we will have that. And the real thing, the point I was trying to make is marginal improvements are okay, they're not bad, but when David talks about 5%, we wipe that gain out in 2 years of GDP growth. We need to solve a 100-year problem, not a 2-year problem, and you have 2.5% global growth in GDP, and you wiped out suddenly 5% gains. So the real solution is the big hammers that we need to work on. I also agree material science is open to a lot of innovation, but the real fact is it's very likely quantum computing will do much more for material science research than AI as we know it today. And we have to separate those things, not lump everything together. We talk about grid optimization. Most of it can be done with older statistical techniques. It's not new AI kinds of models, though those are starting to help. And we're starting to see big impact in climate models, for example. or weather prediction. But by and large, people confuse a lot of different terms. And my main argument is we need to solve hard physical sciences problems in math, physics, chemistry. And that's what we should be focused on. That's why we create an AI scientist and increase the scientific capability of the world by 1,000-fold. We will make rapid progress. And that's sort of, I think, where I'd agree with Bill.
So a quick point on the safety testing issue. I think I wouldn't want to work in a factory where the metal in the machinery had been predicted to be safe by AI, but it had never been physically tested. I don't think we want to change fundamental safety protocols to a first order approximation based upon whether it's human intelligence or artificial intelligence that created the material. It's the same metal and it needs to go through the same type of safety protocols in general.
So David, would you be safer if we tested it in the physical world in 6 different conditions or tested in the AI world in 60,000 different conditions?
I think we need to simulate it with AI, down select, but then test it in the real world. I think that's answering your question.
So maybe I just add on to the conversation. The reason we are asking ourselves testing, safety, and the whole 9 yards, because for the state, for the governments, there's a perception of risks around sovereign risk, national risk, public good risk, et cetera, et cetera. So if you take that particular lens, how do we create an environment by which we can innovate safely? And I think this is where everybody is chiming into this conversation. How do we create a trusted environment by which you have guardrails, by which you can innovate? And to that end, I think there are a lot of global forums by which I think governments are trying to coalesce around this. And I think in Singapore specifically, they released a specific framework. There's a 9-dimension framework. Inside this framework, there are things like obviously incident reporting, testing and assurance, content provenance, et cetera, and it sounds very logical, but how do you operationalize this from a policy deployment? Now coming back to, do we need physical testing? There must be an intermediate step where, to Vinod's point, can you simulate in high fidelity, physics-based in the real world before you release it out? I think that capability is coming along, but it's still work in progress in my view. So I think that's an intermediate step, given what we think AI is capable of, at least at this juncture.
I want to go to a topic that Vinod and I talked about a little bit, and I know Melanie touched on it a little bit as well in her talk, and I may want to bring you in for this part, Melanie. I think one part of this story that's getting a lot of headlines, warranted or not, is the energy demand of AI. How can we ensure, and maybe David, I'll start with you, how can we ensure that there is not alert to natural gas or keeping existing coal in the ground in a way that could lock in this fossil fuel infrastructure for much longer than it should be there?
This issue's gone stratospheric in the United States. I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, every major newspaper is talking about it. There are maybe a dozen different reports from equity analysts, from consultancies on this topic, and I think it's because in the United States in particular, we've had 0 to 1% load growth for the past several decades, and suddenly utilities are realizing they need to do more. A few points. First, the uncertainty on this is enormous. There are people who say, there are people who know what they don't know, I think, and there are people who don't know what they don't know. I think we don't know, on this point, we should know that we don't know. And look, we know the high likelihood that AI demand is going to increase, but at the same time, GPU efficiency is going to increase dramatically. Algorithmic efficiency is going to increase dramatically. Will that lead to exploding power demand because the use cases expand? We don't know. And at the same time, by the way, it's a very happy fact that the largest hyperscalers in the world building these data centers are also the world's largest purchasers of renewable energy, which is going to help to control the problem when it comes to emissions. So one, the uncertainty is very large. 2 other points. I think in the United States, a lot of the applications that are currently pending with utilities are vaporware. I think every hyperscaler has put in a lot of applications, and then the people who are selling to them are also putting in applications in the hope that they might make the queue. But I don't think all of them are ultimately going to make their way through. So I think there's some misunderstanding on this. Final point, I was in China recently talking with Chinese analysts about this, who are kind of amused by the fact that in the United States, the power sector is so stressed over the idea of 3 to 4% load growth in a year. I mean, in China and India, they've been doing 5-6% load growth every year for the past several decades. So I think we've lost the muscle memory for that in the United States, and I think we'll catch up.
Melanie, can I bring you in again? I know you touched on this, but as a company leading on both the innovation of AI, but also the energy use of AI, can you talk about what you guys are doing to ensure that there's not a big lurch toward natural gas?
So I think David did a great job of explaining the three components to how we think about this, and really hope that the people in the room really kind of absorb that piece of it, because I think that piece is often lost in the messaging that comes out from this perspective. I think the key piece has been to ensure that we continue to make these big bets on all the sources of carbon-free power that are out there. You spent your time talking with Vinod on fusion systems. Microsoft announced a power purchase agreement with another fusion company called Helion last year for the first 50 megawatts that would come off of that facility to help them continue to scale. I think these are the types of things where we're looking at advanced reactor technology, which, as Vinod rightly pointed out, you need that type of firm, large sources of carbon-free power to come online as quickly as possible. And what role do companies like technology businesses, but others, play in scaling those? I think another data point is the role that, frankly, tech companies have played in scaling the corporate PPA market to bring new and additional capacity. We have done it before. We can do it again. We are continuing to make these large-scale investments. The largest single PPA, the first of its kind, was the one we did with Brookfield at 10.5. So I think these are the types of things that, as we need to electrify everything, so it's not just data centers, it's going to be transportation, buildings. This is a moment for the United States and other countries to really think about how do we accelerate that transition. And so I would say Microsoft's role in it is our policy advocacy with regulators and policymakers of what is it going to take to implement the provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act, to scale renewables and transmission in the United States, in Europe, in Asia as well. Those are key components, where the investment's going in this space. But if we can do those things, these are ways that we continue to be able to achieve the growth that we're seeking, in addition, in a way that is in parallel with the sustainability commitments we set for ourselves.
If I can weigh in also, so I think one thing maybe implicit in the prior responses that I don't fully agree with is that the growth of energy use of AI is an inevitability. Now, I think not people are
nodding her head, excuse me, in agreement, so that's good.
Or yeah, in terms of from an algorithmic perspective. It's not, for example, like blockchain, where if you are using proof of work, you're doing something like counting primes. It's sort of energy is the thing, is the internal currency to that. There's no fundamental law that says better AI must use more energy. And so I also think that we need to really challenge some of the incentives that are causing AI to be developed in this particular way. Because right now, if you are a large technology company, right, power is relatively cheap. Decarbonizing the grid is a great thing to do. Getting more clean, firm power is a great thing to do. But if power is cheap enough for your corner of the world, you're going to keep doing that. But it then turns out, actually, from an equity perspective as well, that not everybody can afford to purchase like that. So there are a lot of reasons to also think about how do we actually incentivize the development of algorithms in a way that is not so fundamentally energy intensive while still being, well-performing.
Can I add something that Melanie said that's really important? If Helion can deliver the fusion machine that Microsoft has done a PPA on, this whole issue goes away. Right? And there's credible people like Sam Altman involved with Helion. So this world can change very dramatically with one technology breakthrough. They're taking a high-risk approach that nobody else has done, but if it works, it solves the problem not only for Microsoft, but for everybody else too. So we have to plan on high variability. And Priya's right. There's 3 different ways to do computing for AI. Nobody's done analog, nobody's done optical for the same algorithms. And there's 3 different ways to come up with alternative algorithms. So rapid change is likely in this area. And we have to learn that we can't plan on projections. We have to plan on rapid adaptation to whatever's happening in the world and these breakthroughs that happen. Same thing in climate. Look, my favorite story in climate is the year 2010. The Department of Energy did a report talking to all the experts, every expert institution on automobiles, all the major auto manufacturers, for 2035, 25-year plan or projection. Elon Musk single-handedly exceeded that 5 years later. So they were wrong by 20 years in 5 years. And it happens because instigators like Elon go change the world. Helion could be that, Commonwealth fusion could be that. In every one of these areas, that's what's needed. That's why we need more scientists working on this, but we will have surprises. And so I find these fatalistic discussions a little naive is probably the right word, because every time there's a problem, somebody starts working on it. There's a lot of work in optical computing to do multiply and accumulate functions, which is the key to AI today, in optical domain. If you can, you change the consumption by a lot.
What
And
should
maybe, if I could weigh in there too. Yeah, I mean, I think the kind of, to me, like a big takeaway, right, is like both of these are vectors through which the reduction could happen, but there are a lot of incentives to place all eggs in one basket that are not necessarily always coming from that are sometimes coming from disingenuous places, not from you, but in the sense that I think we need to say, okay, we shouldn't say, oh, we don't need to think about the energy efficiency of AI because Helion will pan out, but rather let's try to get that to pan out and let's improve the energy efficiency of AI. And then also think about places where sometimes the timelines align in slightly suboptimal ways. So if fusion becomes a deployable reality in 5 years, but the energy problem in those intermittent 5 years is really difficult, that's not a nothing problem as well.
In our final few moments together, I want to touch on something Melanie said, which is incredibly important, is what is the role of government here? You talk about having to not have so many incentives. Vinod, I might throw this one first to you, but what should the role of government be in governing AI, and also to the degree there should be some control over what kind of energy AI is coming from?
Two things. First, policy always encourages or discourages investment. The IRA Act made a huge difference to a development of a wide range of technologies. But what matters is what Melanie was talking about is Microsoft did a PPA with Helion. There's a lot of corporates in this room in their area of need. If they did that, that'll accelerate development. And Microsoft's not at risk if Helion can't deliver the energy. There's a planning issue, but it's not a lot of risk for corporates in this room to make bets on technologies and encourage its development. I think that would help a lot.
Russell, would love to bring you in very quickly about your perspective as an investor to respond to what Vinod said about the role of government in AI.
Maybe I alluded a bit to it earlier, how typically when a government regulates the emerging technology, which is fast-moving and very difficult to be very predictive of the future, is a very difficult proposition. So how do you encourage innovation despite the risk that comes with it? And I think for AI specifically, I alluded to how do you create a trusted environment, how do you have real guts given its outsized potential, at the same time still make sure it's very, very open for innovation. So what can regulators or developers or government agencies do? I think that there are three things they need to do in this regards. One, in the case of AI, you need in-house technical capability because this is a very technical topic. You need to know the guts of it, and you have to build that. So if you don't have that as a regulating agency or an agency that looks at this area, I think you're not going to be able to do anything. Second, find smart ways to create sandboxes to test, iterate rapidly. And you need that capability technically to go and operate the sandboxes. And then finally, I think this is a global commons method in many, many ways. It cuts across borders. So I think the ability to participate, convene in global platforms to come to a global common consensus how to deal with AI, I think is important. And we shouldn't forget the countries that are left behind in this space, no different from the climate transition, right? Example, in Singapore, we leading what they call FOSS, Forum of Small States in the United Nations. There are about 108 countries there. So Singapore is taking a lead role to convene. Now, some of the small countries are way ahead on this topic. A lot of countries are not up to speed. So how do you level up as a global community that we converge in some kind of common standards or common framework? So that's how I think we should go about doing it.
Well, one quick idea, Amy, disclosure requirements. I think it's something governments can do and should do in this space. I think it would help to build up confidence, particularly in the area we were just talking about around energy usage and greenhouse gas emissions. If anyone training a model or using a model was required to disclose their energy and greenhouse gas emissions, we'd learn a lot from that.
So just one point on, I wanted to chime in. I think to Vinod's point, the amount of, we all used to one computing architecture, x86, von Neumann architecture, et cetera, et cetera. But to Vinod's point, there are a lot of alternate computing architectures that are potentially a lot more energy efficient. And the model side is evolving so rapidly. There's some emerging ones that are non-quadratic in nature that changes the entire stuff. If you can move data in photon instead of electron, could be conceivably also quite analog, digital in compute memory, many stuff. So you can, I think that the energy consumption will rise, but maybe not rise the way we said it. In the short term, it's going to rise, regardless of what we do, because of the potential of this whole AI infrastructure. Whether the electrons are green or not, I think sovereign states are going to build up their capability, hyperscalers are going to build, so that 2-3 year rise is happening. After that, to Vinod's point, it could change quite drastically, yeah.
In our final moment together, I want to do a quick lightning round and continue what I had asked Vinod. Can each of the additional panelists say what's one memorable thing that you asked ChatGPT or another AI service about that you want to share with the group? It can be anything at all. Gardening was Vinod, so.
Mine was much more professional. So I'm giving a talk next week to a group of VCs on AI and climate, and I asked ChatGPT to discuss themes that would be helpful for that audience. But then I asked Meta AI the same question, and Gemini the same question, and Bard the same question, and Anthropic Claude the same question. And then I asked ChatGPT to compare the 4 answers and discern themes and differences. It was actually, it's very helpful. I would say, because I'm familiar with this topic, I don't know that I learned anything I didn't know, but it was very useful in distilling themes. And I think if I were asking about gardening, I would learn a lot.
Priya?
Academics are often in the situation where you have a piece of text that just needs to be slightly shorter than you originally wrote it, so that.
I love that. I use it for that as well. Russell, you get the final word.
Yeah, Temasek, being an investment firm that invests across geographies, sectors, different asset classes, and fairly complicated financial transactions and charts I have to see. So I use Gemini for Omni, not Gemini, ChatGPT for Omni. When I look at charts that are sometimes too complicated, I'll take out my phone and take a snap. Please explain this chart to me. And then sometimes the answers are pretty good, and you're not totally ignorant of what the chart tells you, but you're not sure, so you use that off and on. So I use that somewhat, yeah, just to get a sense of what the financial charts are saying.
I love that. Well, thank you to our panelists, and thank you for the audience for tuning in. And because the next session, we will be covering the built environment and reducing the emissions. Thank you.